Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome our listeners and podcast viewers to the second episode of our FSOKS Insights podcast series for financial service professionals. I'm your host, Joe Rossi, Principal at Turtle Bay Advisory Services. As part of our 2022 mission, we're looking to tackle topics that are relevant to the financial services industry. We're inviting guests both within Turtle Bay Advisory Services and also as part of the overall financial services community. Today we'll be continuing that effort to discuss quantum computing and its role in cryptography. Never thought I'd be actually talking about quantum computing in the context of anything but Star Wars, but here we are. I'm excited today to welcome a Turtle Bay subject matter expert, Louis Stoll. Welcome, Louis. He's the founder and CEO of NefosNow. Also, I'd like to invite and welcome George Vlahos to discuss Louis's white paper and the current status of quantum computing.
Oh, thank you.
An important topic for the industry as a whole. In fact, our research is telling us that investment in quantum computing as a market is estimated to reach $1.76 billion by 2026. Companies need to prepare for the future of quantum supremacy. As quantum computing gain ability to quickly decipher various encryption technies, what was once secure information can now be opened by anyone with a malicious intent. So I think from this point forward, organizations and governments need to prepare to counteract and mitigate the risks of quantum supremacy poses. So that is where we are. That's the problem statement you would guess. Now, I found it more interesting. I came across a article publication from National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, as everybody knows. I'd invite you to go to our website, turtlebayadvisoryservices.com, and pick up a link to this publication. It's interesting. And while quantum computing, and our guests will expound on this, really as a matter of practice and where we are from a technology point of view, is some years out. No one can exactly quantify the number of years out that these technologies pose a risk to in the cybersecurity space. There are some things that we should be prepared for now, or preparing our organizations for now. And at one point in this article, and I advise people to take a read of it. The authors pose a question: do we even know where our encryption standards are within the organization? So what is the problem that quantum computing poses to the IT practitioner today? And for many information technology and operational technology professionals and systems, there is a dependency on public key cryptography. But many organizations have no inventory of where this cryptography is used. It makes it difficult to determine where and with what priority post-quantum algorithms will need to be replaced. Tools are urgently needed to facilitate the discovery of where and how public key cryptography is being used in our existing technology infrastructures. And we all know how difficult, complex it is to navigate organizational infrastructure to document, determine where these algorithms, cryptography key algorithms are located. So that's the start of our problem. I'd like to turn it over right now to Lewis and to give us a more in-depth insight into the problems of quantum computing in the current environment.
So my interest in quantum computing goes way back years ago. I worked at Los Alamos National Labs, and one of the great scientists that came through there was Richard Feynman. And in his quest to solve some of these same kind of problems that George was talking about, he came to the realization that there was a limit in terms of the kinds of problems that could be solved using traditional computing. And so back in the late 80s, he had proposed a solution that would use a different kind of method that would, instead of relying on ones and zeros, would be able to take advantage of quantum mechanics to come up with solutions that would be able to work many, many times faster than traditional computing. And so that was a subject that people at first found curious, and then later on, as they started working at it, realized some of the complexity of it. Um, I worked for one of the major supercomputer companies, and so I worked for a number of years in the area trying to understand what kind of the limits were of the digital computing world. And we looked at some of these things, and we really came to the conclusion that it was many, many years off into the future. I came back into this conversation as a result of conversation with some friends of mine who were working in the area of quantum computing, and they were telling me of some of the major breakthroughs that they had. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. They're actually finally starting to make progress on that. Well, over a very short period of time, those interesting areas of progress actually became rather startling in terms of how fast the market, the capability was growing. So it was with that that I started really digging in and trying to understand exactly what that meant, because having seen what supercomputing did, I recognized that there was, this is not something that may happen. This is going to happen. Now the question is, what's the window?
George, let me pose the same question for you. Quantum computing,
Sure.
how's industry using it right now? And really, how far off in the future is the real risk to institutions that, you know, our cryptography could be, in fact, compromised?
Sure. Thank you, Joe, for the question, and happy to be here and joining this important meeting. I think. Uh, just a little bit more about myself. I spent many years working for major computer companies, namely Oracle, Fujitsu, and Amdahl. And I go as far as back as Seymour Cray and Control Data Corporation, whereas I was exposed at the time at using and programming supercomputers. I have a BS in mathematics and physics and a master's in computer science, and I found this background to be very helpful while we are pursuing quantum computing. So in the past few years, me and my team, been doing extensive research in the emerging field of quantum computing, as I believe this to be the next frontier of quantum of computing, and combines the quantum mechanics laws and and computer science. So just digging into your question, so quantum computing has the potential to change the way we do computer and the world we live in today. And basically, we're interested in quantum computers for two reasons. First, because there are problems out there in the industry, in the government in general, that classical computers will never solve on time or ever. Problems like simulating the molecular structure of a virus like COVID. So if we had a fully capable quantum computer today, we could uh, uh, have a model of the virus out there and applying different methods to find a cure. So hopefully we can do that in the future. Or calculating the best, another problem, calculating the best route for a salesman to visit all 50 states and return back to his house, so to speak. Or, for example, if we wanted to factorize a large number, let's say a number with 300 digits into its two prime numbers, it will take a classical computer today 150,000 years to do that. But a quantum computer with the right number of qubits, as Louis mentioned, qubits, it can do it in 100 seconds. Second, the other reason we're looking at quantum computers, as we approach the end of Moore's law, and everybody's familiar with Moore's law, where it says every 18 months we double the number of transistors inside the same size chip. Well, we're approaching this limit now where the transistor approaches the size of atom. And well, we're going to be in a standstill. There's no way we can double the number of transistors to double the speed of the chip or so, or make the chip faster, because there's no way we can split an atom. Once we get to the size for the transistor is the size of the atom, it's I mean, we can split the atom, but it's going to require a nuclear power system to do that. But there's no way you can do that. So that's the fundamental reasons why we're looking at quantum computers. So quantum computer is a complete departure from the way we do computing today. And as Louis said, it harnesses the principles of quantum mechanics like superposition, entanglement, and measurement. And superposition is the most important one of the three, although all three are important. And it means that matter, like an atom, can be in two places, let's call them 0 and 1, at the same time. That's very weird, so to speak, but that's the way it is with qubits. So how we make quantum computers? Well, quantum computers are made out of atoms or photons that we call, as I said, qubits. So we align a bunch of these qubits in a scheme at very low temperatures and isolate them in a vacuum. We isolate them because they are very sensitive to the environment. Each time we look at them or somebody measures them, so to speak, using a laser or so, those qubits, they disappear. They become just regular bits. So that's how we make these computers. And I mean, there is more
George,
to it. I'm just simplifying
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, but George, I'd add a couple of things. It does sound like the level of complexity, the level of sophistication, and the investment to do this is not the sort of thing you would find a normal, I'll say hacker in a basement able to achieve, and therefore, so why do I worry about it? Now, what comes to mind, of course, is that nation states, in fact, with criminal intent, might in fact be in position to achieve this. If it is that complex, requiring that level of investment, that level of sophistication, how many years away are we from seeing something that might in fact pose a real practical risk to institutions?
Right, that's a good question. So let me answer that if I could. So today we have quantum computers that I call them quantum devices, but that are made from some big corporations, IBM, Google, Microsoft, IonQ, Honeywell, and others. And they can also operate in the cloud. So they have ways that a customer can access these quantum computers that are available today through the cloud, through IBM's cloud or AWS and so forth. And just going back to your question, so the more qubits, the more powerful the quantum computer is. Today we have quantum computers that are approaching about 130 qubits. And the power of the quantum computing comes from the superposition principle, whereas a qubit is in two computing states at once, at the same time, where the bit is only in one state. So you can see how powerful this feature can be when it comes down to computing. For example, if we have 3 qubits, we have 8 computing states that the function, we can apply function to all those states at the same time. So if we have 4, we have 16 states. 5, 32, and so on. So the computing power of the quantum computer doubles each time we add a qubit. So we use a bunch of quantum gates to operate on those qubits until we reach the solution or the state that we're looking for. And that's why you can see that the quantum computer is ideal to simulate the quantum system, like the molecule of the COVID virus or any other chemical structure, because it operates like the quantum system. So to answer your question, where we are today and where are we going? So we have today, as I said, we have quantum computers that with about 130 qubits, and so let me get back a little bit, then I'll get to the question. So I mentioned one of the application, and then the main application that started this whole era of quantum computing, it was the simulating quantum systems. But besides simulation of quantum systems, we can use quantum computers, as I said, to factorize large RSA cryptography numbers in their 2 primes, and therefore break cryptography as we use it today. Today, most of the cryptographic schemes out there, they're using huge numbers, and that they're made out of 2 primes. I mean, we can take 2 large primes and produce a large number, and we use that number as part of our cryptography scheme to create keys that 2 parties can use the same key, so to speak, to exchange messages. So here's the fear, okay? As I said before, to break a number with 300 digits, it will take a classical computer 150,000 years. But in 1994, Peter Shor, a fellow from MIT, came up with a groundbreaking quantum algorithm that proved that a quantum computer with the right number of qubits can break cryptography. Well, people heard about that, and that raised breaking cryptography, raised the red flag, and sparked a big interest in developing quantum computers. Here's the catch, though, and they want to do it before the other guy. But to do that and to break this number of 300 or digits or 4,000 digits or whatever the numbers are used today in today's cryptography schemes, it would require a million qubits and a lot of error correction. Those qubits, we don't have them available today. So it will take a few years to get there. We're moving fast. I mean, I said IBM has 130 qubits today. 6 months ago, they had 60 qubits. So it's going very fast because there is a lot of interest all over the world. There is a lot of investment. I think the U.S. government appropriated $1 billion. So did China, and so did the European Union. So there's a lot of effort, research, and development going on to come up with a full complete quantum computer, fault tolerant, as I said. So,
George, you raise a lot of
So, Joe, let me weigh in here if I let me weigh in here if
yeah,
I could for just a minute, Joe. First off, I think it's important to understand that the goal for creating quantum computers was not to break cryptography, although that may be one of the byproducts. The goal was to solve these world-class problems like climate modeling and some of the world's difficult economic problems, and it goes back to the thinking that drove Feynman to propose this in the first place, is that the problems that we are trying to solve are quantum mechanical in nature, and you need something that models quantum mechanical systems as a quantum mechanical system. And so that's what drove this research and is driving
right,
all of the investment these companies are making. Why Google got involved. Google isn't interested in trying to break security. They're interested in these world class
right,
problems. Now, having said that, right, the challenge, the question is, first off, it's like the development of nuclear energy. It was neither good nor bad. It's how we use it. And so, if people were to just use this for good things, we might have 15 or 20 years. The question that I think that it needs to be posed here is, what is the window of time, both on the short side and the longest time, that we can rely on the standards that we have today, and when we can't, then what
right, and the
happens?
growth of investment, Lewis. You make a good point. I wanted to segue in there into quantum computing is growing each and every year. I see one report that even said that it will reach by 2026 $1.76 billion US dollars. And that amount of investment, and also the competitive nature of the industry, might put us off what, maybe 8, 9, 10 years, where that is a marketable and available technology. Is that somewhat reasonable?
So let me give you my perspective on what I see, or I should say, what my research has discovered. IBM had a quantum summit where they invited all of the major players in quantum computing together to talk about what the state of quantum computing was. And in that summit, one of the things that IBM did was they announced their roadmap. Now, keep in mind that, and this is, I'm sure, something that's going to be near and dear to the heart of anybody interested in this subject. It takes more than just hardware to make a solution. And one of the things that's happened very quickly over the last 2 years is a number of different consortiums that have led to both standards that allow people to develop solutions that can be moved from system to system, as well as efforts to understand and try to characterize what defines the best kind of computing solutions. And one of the problems that George alluded to is the whole issue of error correction. Well, that's a major challenge, and you go back to the era of supercomputing that George and I came out of. We had multiple models of computing systems that were created just to deal with the error correction problem. We can make them super fast, but making them
right,
accurate and reliable, major problem. And you can't go down these paths from a commercial standpoint until you have
right,
those. That's not necessarily true for things that are being used for nefarious purposes. You can take, first effort. If you think about what happened with the ENIAC when people were trying to crack German codes back during Second World War, there were many imperfect versions before they got to the perfect version because the intelligence was so valuable. So that is a point that we have to consider and be pragmatic about. But having said that, IBM's roadmap back at the end of last year actually calls for a system which would be capable of doing 4096 qubits, or I shouldn't say 4096. It's not a binary number, but it's about 4100 qubits in a chip in by the end of the year 2026. And so when you consider the fact that you can when you run these kinds of programs, that these programs basically get reduced down to a specific execution module. You now have the ability to run these on multiple platforms, and through a combination of these, you start seeing the capability evolve to where you say, okay, I need to start looking in the, by simple extension, by the way, in terms of how fast IBM is growing, just using their math, you would see them reaching that 1 million qubit mark around the end of the year 2028,
So, Lewis,
based on their current rate of growth.
in the literature,
So anyway, my point is, I think we've got about 5 to 7 years of a window, my personal opinion,
and Lewis,
but that varies depend on each person's risk.
just to underscore that, I think in all the literature I've looked at here, we can't accurately predict exactly when quantum computing capability for compromising the public keys would be available. But there are some practical things that should be done now in the years leading up to this, and again, getting prepared for it. Again, I'll go back to the article, the NIST article, getting ready for post-quantum cryptography. And a link to the paper is available on turtlebayadvisoryservices.com. So any of our listeners who may want to take a look at that, I'd encourage it. But, at a very practical level, what they're saying here is that, many IT organizations and operational IT organizations are dependent upon public key cryptography. But many of those organizations do not have a clear inventory of the of where the cryptography is being used. At a very practical level, a start on understanding and having well documented an inventory of where these keys are being used within an institution seems like good advice. Would you agree, and how would you guide them, Lewis?
Well, so I think it's important to understand that anything that's electronic, if there's a privacy component, uses these systems. It's not a special class that's used for enterprises. If you've got a cell phone, you're dependent on this encryption. If you have any kind of a computer connection at home, you're dependent on this encryption service. So it's really a question of what is the value of the information. I'm not sure that anybody's going to pay a lot of money to listen to my phone calls. Maybe they would, but certainly there are certain phone calls and there are certain types of interactive communication that would be very sensitive. Beyond that, we have all kinds of information that intellectual property, new designs of various products, we've got financial transactional information, all of which is very sensitive. And so you have to look at the risk associated with it in the context of the time frame necessary to solve it. So the things that require real time, those are going to be further out kind of problems, and you don't really have to worry about those. But if you have things that are very, very sensitive that you could never, even 10 years, 20 years later, allow your competitors or other people to see, those are high areas of risk and need to be inventoried and protected now. Further, I think that there's a lot of operational policy that will need to change. If you think about the risk associated with somebody sitting in on a publicly traded company's board phone calls, knowing what the next quarter's finances are going to be, that would be a real problem. And so, this is something that there's going to have to be changes in terms of how we communicate. There's going to have to be changes in terms of how we protect and secure information, and how do we do that in a way that makes things verifiable. One of the areas, Joe, that I know that you're very interested in is the whole area of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. This puts all of that economy at risk unless it can be dealt with. So I would say, if you said what's the one industry that's most at risk as a result of this, I would point to that.
Right, and Lewis, thank you for that. I just for our listeners, just so if you're interested, Lewis has written a white paper which is available again on our website, turtlebayadvisoryservices.com, where he outlines the mitigation approaches that might take while there is further development in this space. We're nearing the end of our podcast, and I want to get some final thoughts from each of you. Again, at a practical level, what should our practitioners understand about quantum computing where we are now, and what are some of the exposures and risks that might happen in the future that warrant a more thorough preparedness in this space? Louis, any last thoughts for our audience?
A couple of different things that I would want them to take away from this. The first one is to recognize that there are, as George points out, important things that can be done today. You don't have to wait until quantum computing exists before either the threat is real or you can start taking countermeasures. And so the key point there is to organize your own Tiger teams of people who really are your internal trusted experts, because if they're not trusted, it's not enough just to have people who are experts. They really have to be trusted, because if you don't trust them, you might know about it, but you're not going to take the next step of actually doing things about it. So these people already exist for the most part within the organizations, and need to be empowered to really follow this, given the time and given the resources to be able to start playing and experimenting, as George would say. And then the other thing is just start really becoming very aware of the industry advancements that are occurring. This is moving much faster than I ever expected it to. And the key point there, China recently announced in July of last year, and you have to discount this because they do tend to sometimes overclaim. But they already claimed to have a system that was 1 million times more powerful than the most powerful supercomputer. And so by extension, that is, because that is the definition of quantum supremacy, as any machine that's capable of doing things that can't be done on traditional computing systems. So in that category, they're out there and they're working actively. The second one is that you have to also recognize that there are opportunities for special purpose systems that are very different from the general purpose systems. So you have to have an informed eye as you're reading these articles to understand where that fits in the overall solution space. So number one, you don't panic, but number two, you don't get surprised.
So I think that's a proper way of ending our podcast. Gentlemen, I thank you for joining us. I want to remind our audience that we do have an upcoming podcast. This time we are interviewing executives from BlockStation. And the subject will be how BlockStation, the new digital asset marketplace solutions, have changed the way stock exchanges and their ecosystem partners tokenize digital assets and securities. Gentlemen, again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.